Tyler Thomson, thank you for joining me on the ITA College Tennis Coaches podcast.
My pleasure, Dave.
Well, Tyler, we've known one another for quite some time. You were the head women's tennis coach at University of Minnesota when I started my career on the women's side at Northwestern and got to know each other quite well. And I think we've had many interesting conversations through the years. Some of them we could probably record and be okay. Others we probably wouldn't want to air, but I've always so appreciated your curiosity. The amount of interest you have in many different parts of, I guess, the world, the universe. I'm just interested to know, why did you decide, with so much curiosity about the world, interest in so many different places, why did you decide to devote your professional career to college tennis coaching?
Yeah. Well, just to begin with, I just want to say I always enjoy my conversations with you. So this is a great opportunity to just chat. And I'm also so pleased that you are going to be leading us into the future. And
Thank you.
yeah, really happy about that. Um, I didn't real purposely choose to get into coaching. When I finished my playing career, I never wanted to see a racket again. I had I had I had come into contact with the limits of my athleticism so many times that I was ready to hang it up by then, and just kind of stumbled on coaching a couple of years later because I had nothing else to do. Honestly, I had my grandfather, who was in his 90s, a really wise man. I asked him for advice on my career. I was really floundering, and he said, "Do what you do better than anybody you know, or anybody in your neighborhood, because there are plenty of people I knew who did it better than me." So tennis was the one thing that I really had excelled at, relatively speaking. And so I got into coaching and ended up loving it. And the reason I've stayed with it is there are many, many reasons, but I would say primarily I think being on a college campus is invigorating, being around thinkers and ideas, being around young people is invigorating, having an active lifestyle, which is fantastic, having an opportunity to impact people and to help people grow. So I think it's one of the best jobs in the world, for sure in our industry. I look at all the other jobs in tennis and I think, man, I'm so glad to be in the position I'm in. So it's just a job that I love.
Yeah. Okay. That sums it up nicely. And so is that really what keeps you motivated, keeps driving you forward? Is it just from a place of love? Has that shifted as you've maybe changed roles or changed from one campus to another? Or has that always been kind of your guiding light? I mean, do you ever get, I guess, have you ever got to, say, this point where we're talking in August, the season, fall season's right around the corner? Have you ever got to that point and gone, "Ooh, I'm not sure I'm ready for this year ahead"?
No, I haven't. I'm almost always ready for the season to end. It's just such a long season, and I feel like one of the luxuries of our profession is having an opportunity to recharge the battery. And I always look forward to that, but I'm always pumped about the new season, about
Mm.
a fresh start, about clean slates for everybody on the team, for, everybody has reason for optimism at the beginning of the season. I always am excited for
Okay, good to hear. And so, through our conversations, it's been very
it.
clear that, a lot of coaches talk about developing their student athletes into great human beings. Um, I believe most of them, but some, you can tell by their actions that winning is definitely more important. And I've never felt that with you. I've always felt that you focus on the human development as much as any coach in maybe any sport ever. You're always trying to figure out how to develop the best culture possible to accomplish that goal. And so I know as a former coach myself, you have that push pull, right? You really want to develop these individuals on and off the court, but you also feel this pressure to win. And so how have you managed that or strike that balance through the years? Is it through just a value system that you have in place? Or how have you, when it's come down to, do I make this decision because it helps us win, but it's going to hurt our culture? How have you erred on the side of improving the culture or not hurting your culture?
Yeah. Well, I would say there are two elements to that. One is cultural impact, and then the other is the development of the person. Those are probably two different things that intersect, but to the development of the person over the player, I've always believed, and I've said this in interviews that I've had, that it would be really strange to have athletics under the umbrella of an institution of higher learning if that wasn't the mission of our existence. That's becoming slightly blurred now, because
Yeah.
it's professionalism is intersecting with amateurism, but I really do, and you can get knocked off that core truth by the pursuit of wins and with ego and trying to outdo competitors, but we really are educators. The tennis is our laboratory, just like chemistry students, process uh, things in a lab, and that's what I believe sport is for. So that always helps ground me in human development and learning. And of course, part of it is learning how to do well at your sport, but it's bigger than that. Um, as it intersects with culture, I have the great luxury of working with one of my best friends, Brian Calvis, who we see eye to eye on what it means to have a good culture and to not have it be driven by winning and losing. We tell every recruit we never really ever talk about winning and losing. If you have a good attitude and work hard every day and you go, oh, and 122 in your career, we're going to be embracing you at the end of every season, at the end of your career. And I think them knowing that we're supportive of them as people, it's not about whether they win or lose, is a release valve for them to bring out their best, to have harmony within the team. And so I I I think it's kind of crazy that people in our industry get distracted from that, honestly. I understand it and I understand their pressures, and I also understand that to some degree, Brian and I are in an ivory tower right now where we have the luxury of being at a top institution with a top team, and there's a history of success, and so we are less likely to feel pressure and somebody breathing down our back. But it still needs to be about the development of the kids, and and that doesn't mean how they manipulate the racket.
Yeah. And so, Tyler, I know in order to develop the type of culture you want to have, I know we've talked about this in the past, just kind of the conversations you would have, not necessarily with individual players, but it could be, say, at a team dinner or something. You would try and throw out something that might be slightly controversial or philosophical, like to get them thinking about broader issues and hopefully create more depth of relationship with them and between them and get to understand each other a little bit more. Is that something you're still doing? Can you give an example of that? And how do you start those conversations, especially in a time when I think we're all a little scared to say the wrong thing, especially maybe to somebody of that age who might be offended by it, whereas 15 years ago we maybe were not worried about that as much. Or maybe you're not worried about it. Maybe that's just me.
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind. You kind of have to read the room a little bit. You know, there are some players who are, I think, on a wavelength with you as a coach intellectually differently than some others might be. Um, and I think also a big part of being able to engage in those conversations without fear, if there are sensitive topics, is being genuine to who you are. You know, like it's so difficult, I think, to be an effective coach if you're not being yourself. And if you feel like you're filtering what you say all the time, curtailing what you say, um, being genuine just helps in all levels of communication, whether it's with a coach and a player beyond. But I guess I'm those types of questions that I guess you're referring to are primarily driven by my curiosity, which you mentioned at the beginning. I'm I think sometimes annoyingly inquisitive. You know, I'm interested about other people. I never go tire of going to cocktail parties and meeting random people because everybody I meet, there's something interesting to learn about them. If they're a corn farmer or they manufacture plastic cutlery, you know, like whatever it is, I find it intriguing. So that kind of drives those types of conversations with the team members. And I love inviting the players to go to art museums when we're on the road or going to see the opera or something like that, just to broaden horizons, create connections with things that go beyond sport. And and I do also like to challenge their critical thinking with current events, political things, get into religious conversations, you know, things that
Mhm.
might be slightly delicate. I think if you handle those conversations with tact, it I think those van rides when you get into those types of dialogues are some of the richest moments for a coach and student athlete.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And Tyler, can you take us through your process? So you were not going back all the way, but you're when we met, you were the head women's coach at University of Minnesota, like I said. Then you went to William and Mary, where you had served as an assistant coach prior, but in the head coaching role this time. And then in 2018, you decided to leave after a couple of decades as a head coach and go and work with Brian again, who you'd served with at William and Mary. Can you talk us through that decision? Why was that the right decision for you at that moment in time?
Yeah. Oh shit, my lights just went off. These are on like a motion detected sensors, so I might run into that again.
No worries.
Um, yeah, I had not, I had no designs to leave William Mary. I really loved it there. I loved my role. I loved working with Jesse Medvine Collins, who was my assistant. But there was a confluence of a few things that led me to consider leaving. One was that I had a really beautifully embedded relationship with the administration there. We had shared values. I was involved in um, some broader context with the athletic department. I was really aligned with the AD, and there was a change of AD, and I could see pretty clearly early on that I wasn't aligned with that new person. And that was hard for me because I wanted to feel like I was working somewhere that I really felt at home and in alignment with the visions of the department at large. So that was one part of it. I also, it would be silly of me to not consider rejoining Brian with a team that had the potential to win a national championship. That's not, uh, was never a shiny goal of mine, but it was pretty freaking cool to have that opportunity. Um, and then also, my children were aging, and I just felt like if I have fewer keys on my keychain, that means I have fewer responsibilities, I have fewer things that I have in my mind when I put my head on the pillow at night, and maybe I could be more in the background and supportive in different ways, and then in the process help my work life balance, and that really came to fruition. It's been a great transition in that regard.
Good. And is there anything you miss about being a head coach?
You know, I think they're all ego driven. Um, and one of them is that when you're the head coach, you're needed by the players all the time. At the end of practice, there's always a gaggle of players needing to ask you something, and you're kind of the first line of people looking for a solution. And so for a while, it was hard for me to feel as if I was not as needed. Um, and as I've grown in my role here and as the players have become more, know me better, I think they're more apt to seek me out for that. But that was difficult, kind of feeling like I wasn't quite as useful.
Hmm.
Um, and I think also when you coach and you lead an organization for so long, you really are imprinting your own values on the organization, and then to move to a situation where you're co-opting your values with someone else can be hard in transition initially, but the beautiful thing is that Brian and I see so eye to eye that we we developed our program values together. And so I really feel as if I have an equal say in uh, the ideals that we pursue. But initially, it was a little hard for me to kind of have to put my personal values on the back burner. But
Hmm.
that's in the past. It's all good now.
Good. And then Tyler, if there's other head coaches out there who have maybe considered a similar move, or contemplated it, or are contemplating it, or I know we're at the end of the summer now, but maybe next summer they're thinking, well, that is something I might want to do. Do you have any advice for them as to how they might land? Because I don't think it's an easy decision, right? So do you have any advice on how they might land on the right decision for them?
Well, I haven't actually investigated the landscape, but I think that Mark Artisan and I kind of were the trailblazers a little bit in this, and
Yeah.
longtime head coaches deciding to go into this role. And I think with the um, increase of resources and the ability for programs to pay two coaches relatively well, I think there's been more of it. Um, I think it really depends on the person, but a big part of it is I think being comfortable enough with yourself and with your ego to not be the guy anymore. You know,
Mhm.
that's and a lot of it depends on the person you would go to work for and with, but it's it's a different situation because you can't really have two captains of a ship. You know, you can have an associate, but there's somebody who really does need to be making the final decisions. And if you feel that that would be difficult for you to be a subordinate, then I would say think twice about it. Um, but I would definitely encourage someone who, like me, was kind of tired of having to make decisions all the time. You know, it's a double-edged sword. It's in some ways it's nice, but it also is kind of fatiguing after decades of it, of always needing to make the decisions or being the person who is in the role to do that. So, um, it just depends on what your appetite is for your leadership role, I think.
Okay. And so, as mentioned, you worked with Brian. You were the assistant at William and Mary from 97 to 01, and then you returned in 2018 at a different institution at North Carolina. So how was Brian a different coach? How had he evolved as a coach from 2001, 2018? What changes did you see in him, or did you see any?
That's a great question. Well, there are more um, recognizable things that haven't changed. I could probably come up with a couple that have, but Brian will always be my mentor, my primary mentor as a coach. I learned 99% of what I know about tennis from Brian, and his energy, his consistency have not changed a bit. He comes every single day with the same attitude, the same degree of engagement, the same sense of humor, um, and is just an incredible person to learn from. If I think about what's changed, I would say he's gotten a little softer. I think it's very uncommon that as coaches age, they become more um, demanding.
Hmm.
You know, there's something about age that softens people, you know, like
Yeah.
how many times have we known an in-law or a grandfather who was just a hard ass as a father, but then when they're a grandfather, they're just looking for opportunities to pile on the ice cream, you know? And
Right.
so I think Brian used to be, he would push and challenge the kids more. Now, I think also that's kind of been a cultural change in the last couple of decades. It's not just Brian, but I have very vivid memories of him just in the face of players with veins popping out of his neck, you know, like, what is your game plan? You know, like getting in their face. And now he's much softer and motivates with less ferocity, I would say, but with no less effectiveness.
Yeah. So if Brian left tomorrow and you became the head coach, or you went somewhere else to become a head coach again, what is one thing you've learned from Brian that you would be implementing straight away?
Gal, well, there's a catalog of drills. When I first got here as an assistant this time around, I felt like I was drinking from the fire hose again with this guy's just bottomless pit of drills that are on just on the fly. Just 10 minutes ago or before we began this call, he had just gotten off the court with some of our players and he's like, let me tell you about these drills I just did with them. And they're brand new, they're fantastic, they're live things. So I started a little notes thing in my phone, like kind of secretly at practice when I got back here, like writing these drills down so I'd remember them. Um, but you know, it has been interesting having been a head coach for a long time and then being able to observe somebody again in close proximity. And what I've noticed about Brian that is so wise, and if I was a head coach again, I would learn from this, is that I don't think there's ever a situation anymore that for him is such a crisis that he feels like he has to act impulsively on it. He he's very measured in how he responds to elements of drama within the team or things that might make a young coach kind of think, I got to call a team meeting right now. You know, that was what I would do young in my career is if something happened, like, okay, get everybody together. We're talking about this, you know, and he's much more measured and, well, let's just kind of see how this plays out. Let's give it some time. So that's something that this time around, amongst many things I've learned from him.
Mm. Yeah, because that kind of leads into my next question about perspective, because I feel like one of many reasons you and I get along very well is that we don't take ourselves too seriously. We have a lot of perspective, I think, about most things in the world. I don't think we get too high or too low. We're quite measured. I'm interested in where did you garner that perspective? Because I think it's rare in this country. Just, you know, for people can say what they want to say about that, but you have a lot of perspective. So where does that come from? And then how do you infuse that into the players that you coach so that they hopefully go and operate in a similar manner? Because I think that's beneficial for them long term, just living in this crazy world that we live in.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind to me is when I travel with my family or alone, we've taken some family vacations this summer, whether it's abroad or domestically. At least once a trip, I say to my kids and my wife that when I travel, it helps me realize that all these people in the world, whether it's in Des Moines, Iowa, or Vienna, every person walking down the street has things to them that are equally important as our things are to us. You know, everybody's going through something. The elements of their workplace or their family or whatever are of paramount importance to them. And it just helps me realize that my stuff really isn't that important, you know, and I think that we can get so ensconced in our lives and our work that we put a inflated amount of importance on what we're doing. As much as I love what I'm doing and I have pride in what I'm doing, I also realize that barely anybody really cares. Um,
Yeah.
you know, we in when we're in our bubble of college tennis, we think that it's of paramount importance, but it's barely on the radar screen with most people in the world. I guess that's your job to change that, Dave. Good luck with it. But you know, something I say to the kids on the bench sometimes is there's a billion China people in China that don't care. You know, when they're in these really high stress moments, just to put things in perspective. I don't know where it comes from for me or why I'm like that, but I've I'm really glad to say that I have grown to be able to almost disassociate myself emotionally from results. Um, Even in the biggest matches, maybe my palms will start to get a little wet. My heart rate generally doesn't raise too much because it's just not that big of a deal whether we win or lose a match. And that kind of goes back to your initial question or point about development. There are larger things to be gained in these moments than fretting about winning or losing. It's more about how do you regulate your emotions in stress. That
Mm.
I think that's one of the keys to having perspective is to not get so amped up over one small thing that happens. I remember reading a book about that reference Ulysses S. Grant when he was having his photo taken in some, official setting, and in the midst of the photo shoot, a big chandelier crashed behind him, and he didn't even flinch. He didn't even turn around and pay attention to it, and so just being able to kind of stay in the present, not worry too much about making a big deal about things. I don't know if I've answered your question,
Oh,
but
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, makes sense. And so we touched upon this a little earlier as Division One athletics is evolving, and I guess it has been over several years, but it seems to be more front and center with all these lawsuits, and there's no doubt we're truly heading in for all sports. This, like you said, I think the intersection of amateur and professional athletes now. And so how are you thinking about that, Tyler? And do you believe you have to change how you operate as a coach to meet this moment? Or is it, no, it's business as usual and I'm just gonna do my thing?
Tricky. It's tricky. I think in the world of business, which I still am reluctant to say that we're in that world, but anyone who is in a competitive field will knows that you have to adjust to a changing landscape or you get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we're going to have to make some adjustments. NIL is a big part of it. Um, but I also think that, and I can't say for sure what 17 and 18-year-olds value these days, but I think there is some um, uniqueness to coaches who are more experienced and are more grounded in things that have worked for a long time. And I actually, and this is probably digressing a bit, but I've been thinking recently about recruiting. And as Brian and I age, whether these kids, whether older coaches become less attractive to kids, or or whether they're attractive to young coaches who they can connect with more with cultural things. Um, and I'd like to think that there's still some value found in the traditions and beliefs of father figures, grandfather figure type of coaches, I don't know for sure. And I actually I've actually given questionnaires to our kids as they've matriculated, asking them these questions about their perceptions as recruits to kind of understand where their mind is. But I guess with this changing landscape, the thing that first comes to mind for me is NIL, where
Yeah.
we're, you start the men's tennis, I know, has already been impacted by it for a year or so. And I know they went from 0 to 100. It's just like bang. If you're not offering money, you're probably not going to have an opportunity at the best kids. And that's beginning to happen on our side, where we're hearing about so and so offered so and so $80,000 a year. And I wonder, are we going to have to do that to remain competitive? And I asked this question of Tatum Evans, who's a rising sophomore on our team the other day, and we talked about how that decision might play in that the element of money might play into their decisions. And she said, I was offered some money, a good amount of money, but I didn't take it because why would I ever trade that for happiness and being at a place where I'm comfortable and I feel a kinship with the people? And I said to her, well, maybe not everybody thinks that way. And what about the kids who are going to be lured by a lot of money? And she said, well, maybe they're not the right people then, which I thought was just such a
Yeah,
beautiful answer. Whether or not we will be able to count on that um, winning the day with recruits of just what we offer here and the happiness that our kids experience as a part of the program, I don't know, but I think a lot of it has to do with their socioeconomic background. If I'm a kid who comes from a family that would not have even been able to pay for me to go to college and somebody dangles $250,000 in front of me, that could be a nest egg for the rest of my life, that's understandable. But I'm hopeful that this doesn't disrupt too much what I think is the most important element of choosing a school, which is feeling that you're with the right people at the right place. I went way far from your question, but it's interesting.
yeah, no, it is an interesting time, and I think we're all watching very closely and trying to learn as much as we can. And there's just, I mean, there's literally one new lawsuit being levied at the NCA every few days at this point. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there's still so much to be played out here over the next few years. But switching gears a little bit, Tyler, I want to get into the ITA Women's Hall of Fame and your involvement in that. I think a lot of our coaches may not be familiar with our halls of fame and that we have them, and the ITA is responsible for managing them. The men's is currently at the University of Georgia. The women are at William and Mary. That's I'm assuming how you got involved initially during your time there. But can you give like a little bit of background about how you got involved, about the Women's Hall of Fame, and then maybe how coaches could learn more about it, or maybe get involved if interested?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, referencing your topic of perspective, I think that's one thing that led me to get involved with the Hall of Fame is an appreciation that there are people who came before us who are responsible for the situation we're in right now, the positive situation we're in. And I love history and I love just learning and knowing about how things came to be. So when I was at William Mary, my second time around, Millie West, who was the founder of the Hall of Fame, who is now passed a couple of years ago, but was an absolute dynamo. Some people referred to her as the grande dame of college tennis, which I love that. But Millie West was a coach at William Mary. She was the first women's athletic director. She was a pioneer with Title IX, and she had the energy and the inspiration along with others to create the Hall of Fame of William Mary. Mark McCormick, who was the founder of IMG, was also really instrumental in the founding of it and the funding of it. And so in the mid 90s, it was established at the College of William Mary. There's a beautiful museum in the indoor center. The charter members included Billie Jean and Althea Gibson and some of the titans of our sport. And the Hall of Fame inducts people every 2 years, coaches, contributors, players. We have a committee that makes those decisions of who gets inducted. That committee is going to be inviting new members in the coming months. So I would encourage any coach who has interest in playing a role in the preservation of our sports history and the perpetuation of its importance to get involved. You're right that I think most coaches don't know we have a Hall of Fame, regrettably. Um, but it's a beautiful museum, and it I think bridges the gap between the past generations and the current generations when we can get student athletes intersected with it, that they realize this isn't just about me. There are women that I have to thank. There are women who had much less than I do. The amount of luxury that our student athletes experience right now is shocking compared to what women 30, 40 years ago dealt with. And I think it's really important that in one way, that the Hall of Fame can serve as a uh, augmentation of appreciation for our current student athletes, of recognizing the women who paved the way for them. We have an induction ceremony that is happening the weekend of August 5th in Williamsburg, Virginia. Everybody's welcome.
October
Um,
5th, Tyler.
October 5th,
You
sorry.
said August. Yeah,
Yeah,
October 5th. Yeah, yeah.
October 5th. It's there's a tournament that's run in conjunction with us by William Mary's women's tennis team. We're bringing players to it. Um, Good tournament, which also exposes your kids to the induction ceremony. The website for the Hall of Fame is itahalloffame.org, and it's a dedicated website for this Hall of Fame. You can see who's been inducted. You can register for the induction ceremony. You can contribute, and I'm hopeful that we just continue to increase visibility for it, and it's been a joy of mine to be involved in it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tyler, for all your work in that area. I've learned a lot more about it in the last couple of years, and we now have a staff member, Jenna Kane, who's working very hard. And so coaches, yeah, please check out. You can also access our Hall of Fame websites through our wearecollegetennis.com, and just explore both the men's and women's Hall of Fame, and yeah, you'll see the incredible history that we have. But it's important. I mean, sometimes people say, well, what does the ITA do? And we have to get into all the stuff that we do. But one of the things that I think goes under the radar is the work on the Hall of Fame, and then the committees that are involved, and the volunteers and the induction ceremonies. These things don't just happen by themselves. A lot of people have to put in a lot of work to make them happen. And you're one of those people leading the charge. So thank you. But Tyler, we're gonna head into some rapid fire questions now. So what book has had the most influence on your coaching career to date?
Man, Dave, it's a tough one. I'm a huge fan of the Ryan Holiday books on Stoicism. Stillness is the Key is a book that I've given to many players, and we had as our team book a couple of years ago. There goes the lights again. Um, yeah, stillness is the key, just as a means of putting things in perspective, of emphasizing the importance of staying in the present. What Drives Winning, I think, is just an incredible book by Brett Ledbetter, which I think a lot of coaches are familiar with, but it's so on point with how I think our priorities should be as a coach in terms of what we talked about earlier, of winning versus, human development versus player development.
Okay. What is your favorite drill to do with your team?
I leave that to Calvis. No.
Okay.
Um, I love drills that make the players suffer. Um, and I love drills that are collaborative, where they're not necessarily competing against one another, they're competing with one another. Um, so a couple that come to mind, real simple one that we'll do occasionally at the end of practice. Everybody on the team is on one baseline, and I am just feeding constantly from corner to corner. I do not stop. And somebody on our staff is counting how many balls the team makes in the court in a row beyond the baseline. It's just they're digging. They're just digging. They're suffering in the corners, not easy balls. And they're in a single file line. And each member of the team, when they come up to the front of the line, they go until they miss. It might be 2 balls, it might be 18 balls. And we go until we get like 300.
Hmm.
And it's a grind. And there's frustration to deal with. I like drills that that prompt frustration,
Hmm.
to provide opportunities to deal with it and to deal with embracing the suck. So that one basically is just, let's say we're going to 300. First person go until they miss on demanding balls in the corner. And I don't take a break. I'm just boom, 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 be ready to go. And I like it because it brings them together. They feel like they've accomplished something together. It reinforces defense, which I think is sometimes difficult to work into practices and get buy-in. Um, yeah, I could go with others, but
Oh, well, it's
it's
awesome.
rapid fire, right?
It's rapid fire. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What are your top two personal values?
I would say curiosity is one of them. Learning, which probably is synonymous with that. And I would say if I was if I was ready for this, I'd be able, without hesitation, give you the top two. But I would say the other one is probably gratitude. I think just a brief comment on that. I just got back from the Cincinnati Open and I'm watching all these players, the best players in the world. And I'm just thinking to myself, why are none of them thanking the ball kids when they give them a towel? They act like it's their birthright, that they're entitled to have somebody hand them a towel and to then take that sweaty towel. And I don't see a single one of them acknowledging that act and saying thank you. How difficult is that? If one pro set the standard and the example of actually looking the person in the eye and saying thank you, I just think that'd be so powerful. And so
Mhm.
gratitude is a big, important value of mine.
Is there one quote that you think of often throughout the college tennis season?
Yeah. I love quotes and I think I spew a lot of them, but the one that's come to my mind most often recently is a quote by Pablo Casals, the cellist, who's a world-renowned cellist and he's 90 years old. And someone asked him why he still practices 3 hours a day at the age of 90, and he said, because I'm just beginning to see some improvement.
Wow.
And I love the quote that I intend to sometimes I make these bookmarks for the team. I'll laminate a quote and give it to encourage reading and encourage
Mhm.
remembering a certain quote. And the one I intend to hand out this year at our first meeting is a quote from Berrettini when he was talking about Sinner. I'm crazy about Sinner. I just could watch the dude play forever. And Berrettini said that Sinner's secret is that he is always striving for improvement.
Mhm.
And I just I love anything that has to do with growth as the reason for doing something, not for some um, result-oriented
Yeah.
outcome.
Is there one rule change college tennis can make to help it become more appealing to the general sports fan?
Whether or not this would cause a wider appeal, I don't know, but I would love to see with our let rule that in doubles, if it's a let, that the returner's partner could play that ball. I just think it would make things a lot more fun. When again, referencing Cincinnati, and I love going to pro tournaments. I feel like I'm in the classroom the entire time. The crowd is always most animated when points go off script and they get wonky.
Hmm.
That's when you hear roars and everybody just loves it. When there's a drop shot and then there's a lob and something wacky happens. And I think that if we allowed that to happen in doubles, I think it would be a lot of fun.
I like it. All right. One thing you hope your players have learned from you by the time they graduate.
Hmm. Um, I would say to better regulate their emotions. 'Cause I just think that that is so critical for life, for whether it's marriage or being a parent or being a good competitor or being um, a good coworker, the ability to not be sparked by impulse too much and to be able to be thoughtful and to find some space for contemplation between stimulus and reaction. And so I hope that my players would have learned to be calm and not have to get too emotionally hot um, when it's unnecessary.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, this has been an absolute pleasure, as it always is. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for all that you do for college tennis. You've served as a mentor in our mentorship program several times over the last few years. You're always willing to put your hand up to help. We've obviously talked about the Women's Hall of Fame. I just think you're a gem. I'm so glad you're in our industry, and I hope you'll keep at it for many decades to come.
Thanks, Dave. And I want to, before you hit stop, I want to just say that partly because of my involvement in the Hall of Fame and seeing more of the machinery of the ITA, I am so incredibly impressed by the growth of this organization in the last decade, primarily under your leadership, Tim's leadership, and I know Corey's been there for a long time, and I don't think many coaches realize how many things you guys juggle and how well organized it is. I think it's often kind of, uh, I think it's too often that coaches just kind of blame something on the ITA, honestly. And I know we always hear in the meetings that we are the ITA, but we don't think about it like that. We think the ITA is you guys.
Right.
Um, but the leaps and bounds that this organization has made in the last 10 years to me is astounding. And I think we're all in debt to you guys, honestly. I don't think we realize how good we have it with the leadership and the progress that you guys have created. So on behalf of all of us, thanks and really eager to have you involved into the future.
Well, thank you, Tyler. That means a lot. I have definitely don't do this job for any thanks or praise. I understand it's always challenging working for a governing body, but I love it, and I love my interaction with the coaches, and obviously want to see the sport kick on. So I will do my very best to build upon what David Benjamin laid in the foundation.